By the time the tow truck started backing down the boat ramp, the sheriff was already laughing. Not a polite chuckle either, but full-on hand on holster, trying not to wheeze laughter as Patricia Denholm, president of the Lakeside Ridge HOA, pointed at my wakeboat and shrieked that my vessel was in violation of community scale parameters and needed to be removed from her lake immediately. The tow driver looked confused and said he was told this was an abandoned boat. I raised my hand and told him I was literally standing on it. The sheriff waved Patricia's stack of papers and explained that her removal order was not a legal document, but rather a word template with her logo on it and a picture of a gavel. Patricia snapped that it was an official HOA enforcement notice. She insisted my boat was over 20 feet and that their covenants were crystal clear about no large, aggressive boats. I tapped the hull and told her it was 22 feet. And also, I owned the lake. Patricia rolled her eyes and said I couldn't own a lake. I smiled, pulled a folded packet from my waterproof duffel, and handed it to the sheriff. He read the first page. Then he stopped laughing and carefully said Patricia's name. He explained that what I had given him wasn't just registration, but the actual deed. Patricia demanded to know the deed to what. He turned the page around so she could see the bold title. Title to Silver Pine Lake and associated literal rights. My name is Grant Walker. I bought my house at the edge of Lakeside Ridge because of one thing, Silver Pine Lake. It's a long, skinny lake that everyone assumes is community property. Ducks, kayaks, wine moms on paddleboards, kids jumping off rental pontoons, all that classic brochure material. I'm a systems engineer by day, introvert by nature, and my social life is 80% solo sunrise fishing and 20% tinkering with my boat while listening to podcasts. The house listing had mentioned partial lake rights, which sounded vague but nice. My real estate attorney friend told me to send him the full title history because that phrasing was weird. We dug into the records. Long story short, the original developer kept ownership of the lakebed and water rights in a separate LLC. That LLC then went dormant. The LLC's assets, including the lake, were auctioned off in a quiet little tax sale years later. A hedge fund bought the portfolio, then dumped it. My attorney traced the chain, found a bargain, and told me it was insane, but I could buy the lake. So I did. I became the slightly bewildered owner of Silver Pine Lake, plus a set of boring but powerful things called literal rights and exclusive licensing authority for docks and motorized use. I kept it quiet. It amused me to watch the HOA behave like they owned it when legally they were glorified shoreline renters. Enter Patricia Denholm. She was Lakeside Ridge HOA's president, commodore of their self-important lake use committee, and the kind of woman who printed agendas for casual conversations. She first approached me at the mailbox with a clipboard and a brittle smile. She told me I was the new owner at Lot 18 and that we needed to talk about my watercraft. I asked what she meant. She said my boat, pronouncing it the way some people say felony. She explained that they encourage tasteful, low-impact vessels like canoes, kayaks, perhaps a small rowboat, but nothing overpowering. I nodded and said I understood. 3 weeks later I took delivery of my dream boat. A gleaming, deep blue, 22-foot wakeboat with a tower, ballast tanks, and an engine that purred like a very confident dragon. From that moment, Patricia decided I was her white whale. The first note appeared on my door like a ransom letter. Violation notice for oversized watercraft. It claimed my boat exceeded the 18-foot limit and disrupted community aesthetics. It threatened fines and towing at my expense if I failed to remove it. There were 3 problems with that notice. The HOA's boat rules were in a guidelines pamphlet, not the recorded covenants. The HOA had no control over the lake, only over driveways and common areas. And I don't respond well to people who try to bully me with fake authority. I wrote back a polite letter. I explained there was no recorded restriction on boat length in the CC and RS. Regardless, the HOA had no jurisdiction over Silver Pine Lake because it did not own the lakebed or associated rights. I respectfully declined their request. The next week, Patricia went from written passive aggression to full surveillance mode. I'd see her on the shoreline with binoculars, timing how long I spent doing wake surfing drills. She launched a Wake Concerns email campaign claiming that large boats were creating dangerous waves and that children and ducks were at risk. She claimed my aggressive wake pattern was causing erosion. She claimed my engine was louder than FAA guidelines, which are for planes apparently. She claimed my boat made the lake feel small. Translation: my boat offended her aesthetic. She started issuing made-up citations. Unauthorized docking at my own shoreline. Non-compliant hull color because apparently only natural tones were allowed in Patricia land. A safety warning for not wearing an HOA-approved life jacket, which is not a thing that exists. I ignored the nonsense and spent my Saturdays doing lazy loops and pulling neighbor kids on a tube with their parents' blessing and full safety gear. Patricia escalated. She put up a sign near the community beach. Be advised, large powerboats are not welcome on this lake. Violators may be towed. She also created a Lakeside Ridge Yacht and Paddle Sport Club with membership consisting of her, 3 board members, and 1 guy who just wanted to grill. She declared they had exclusive usage preferences. Still no legal authority. Still just vibes and stationery. The final straw was a letter slipped under my door at 6 in the morning on a Tuesday. Final warning. Your boat will be removed at 10 o'clock on Saturday morning by a contracted towing service. Failure to cooperate will result in storage fees and legal action. I read it, made coffee, forwarded it to my attorney with 1 line asking if it was time to have some fun, and pulled out my own stack of documents. If Patricia wanted to play Who Owns the Lake, we could absolutely play. Saturday at 10 in the morning sharp, I was on the dock with a thermos and a camera. The tow truck rumbled down the access road, driver clearly wondering how he'd ended up in this episode of Suburban Gladiators. Patricia marched beside it in a navy blazer, blowing a whistle for no reason, followed by 2 HOA board members and a few curious neighbors. She announced loudly that this boat was hereby impounded by authority of the Lakeside Ridge HOA. The tow driver muttered that he usually did parking lots. Patricia told him he was performing a lawful removal of a non-compliant vessel that was a community hazard. He shrugged and started backing toward my trailer. That's when I stepped off the dock, hands in my pockets. I told everyone that just so we were clear, if he touched my boat, he was trespassing and interfering with private property on privately owned water. Patricia laughed and said I couldn't own a lake and that I shouldn't be ridiculous. The lake was common space. It said so on the brochure. I pulled out my folder and mentioned that about that brochure. The sheriff's SUV pulled up just in time, lights off, curiosity on. A neighbor had called and said they thought the HOA president was about to steal a boat. He walked over and asked what was happening. Patricia shoved her paperwork at him. She said they were enforcing size limits and that I had refused to comply. This was a safety matter. The sheriff scanned her tow authorization. His eyebrows climbed. He said it looked homemade and asked where the court order was. Patricia snapped that they didn't need a court order. The HOA had supremacy over shared resources. I handed him my packet and told him I had supremacy over the thing he was standing next to. He opened it. Title: History. Tax Sale Records. Corporate Dissolution. The Deed to Silver Pine Holdings, LLC. He got very quiet. Just to be absolutely sure, he asked if this said I personally was the managing member of the entity that owns Silver Pine Lake. I confirmed that was correct. He continued reading and asked if I had sole authority to grant or revoke access, dock permits, and motorized usage. I confirmed that was also correct. He turned to Patricia and asked if she had told him the HOA owned this lake. She insisted they did. They had dues. They had a lake use committee. He asked if she had a recorded deed. She admitted they didn't, but tried to continue. He cut her off and told her bluntly that if she didn't have a deed, she didn't own it. He looked at the tow truck driver and explained that if he moved that boat without my consent, he wasn't doing a lawful removal. He was committing theft on my property. The driver immediately set the brake and stepped away from the truck like it was radioactive. Patricia's face turned red with anger. She demanded to know if he was kidding. She said they had invested thousands in this lake with signs, kayak racks, and landscaping. I told her she could absolutely keep landscaping on her land, not mine. Patricia crossed her arms and said I couldn't just decide who uses the lake. That would make me some kind of water tyrant. I smiled, and the sheriff actually took a tiny step back like he knew what was coming. I told Patricia that was the thing. Right now I was the nice tyrant. But if she was going to threaten to tow my boat, things were about to change. I had options. I could have just let it go with a stern warning. But Patricia hadn't just annoyed me. She had attempted to seize my property, misrepresented ownership to a third-party contractor, and threatened neighbors with fines for using a lake they thought was theirs. So the next week, I did 3 things. I hired a lawyer to draft brutally clear documents. A formal notice to Lakeside Ridge HOA that they had no ownership interest in Silver Pine Lake. A revocation of any implied licenses previously assumed for organized group use. And a shiny new license agreement for lake use, spelling out terms for any association that wanted access. I mailed the HOA packet. It explained that as the legal owner of Silver Pine Lake, I was rescinding all informal privileges previously extended to their association, effective 30 days from the date of notice. During this period, they could elect to sign the attached license agreement or cease all organized use of the lake and remove any association-owned equipment from the shoreline. I noted that individual homeowners retained limited access via their own property lines, subject to standard safety rules. The license agreement had some interesting clauses. The HOA must acknowledge in writing that it does not own the lake. The HOA agrees to no enforcement authority over boats, docks, or on-water activity beyond basic courtesy guidelines jointly agreed upon. The HOA pays a modest annual fee for communal beach and dock privileges. And the license can be terminated for harassment, misrepresentation, or unauthorized enforcement threats. I also put up signs. Discreet, professional ones at the main access points that read Private Water Body, Silver Pine Lake, managed by Silver Pine Holdings LLC, authorized use by license only. The HOA board called an emergency meeting so fast I think space-time bent a little. Patricia tried to spin it as fake news. Then the HOA's own attorney read the packet and gently explained that yes, this was all extremely real. He also pointed out that the HOA had been representing the lake as owned when it legally wasn't. Their insurance did not cover them for unauthorized property enforcement. And if they kept it up, the lake owner could sue for damages or trespass. Suddenly, the board was a lot less enthusiastic about backing Patricia's crusade. Neighbors started stopping by my dock. They had no idea the HOA didn't own the lake. They asked if they were still allowed to fish if they weren't in the club. I told them yes. Their private shoreline access was fine. I was only dealing with the HOA as an entity. Regular people weren't the problem. Word spread that Patricia had not just overplayed her hand, she'd been bluffing with someone else's cards the whole time. The Lakeside Ridge Yacht and Paddle Sport Club held its season kickoff 2 weeks later. Normally this meant taking over the community beach with branded tents, bossing kids around about where they could swim, and holding safety inspections on neighbors' kayaks like they were Coast Guard officers on a power trip. This year, there was a new addition. 2 crisp white signs staked in the grass near the beach and dock that read HOA-sponsored activities prohibited. Unlicensed organizational use of Silver Pine Lake is not authorized. Underneath was my lawyer's phone number. Patricia arrived in a visor and polo shirt embroidered with Commodore, dragging a rolling cart of clipboards. She stopped dead when she saw the signs and demanded to know what this was. I stepped forward and told her that was me kicking her entire club off my lake. She fluttered the packet she'd never signed and insisted I couldn't do this. They were the official lake stewards. I told her they were until she tried to steal my boat. Around us, neighbors gathered. Some whispered. Some filmed. I raised my voice just enough to carry. I explained that to be clear, individual homeowners could still kayak, paddle, and fish with no problem. But the HOA and its club were no longer licensed for organized events, enforcement patrols, or any activity conducted in the association's name. Patricia hissed that I wouldn't dare. I pulled out my phone and hit play. A recording of Patricia's voice from the tow day. This boat is hereby impounded by authority of the Lakeside Ridge HOA. We own this lake. The HOA attorney, standing miserably near the picnic tables, looked like he wanted to burrow into the sand. I pointed out that we had confirmed they didn't own the lake. But she did lie about it. To a contractor, to residents, and to law enforcement. That was a liability buffet. The board's vice president cleared his throat shakily and said that given the legal risk, the board had voted not to sign the license agreement under current leadership. I translated for everyone that her HOA lost lake privileges because she couldn't handle one guy's boat. Patricia spun to her board and said they couldn't just let me hold them hostage. The treasurer winced and explained that they couldn't afford the insurance implications if they pretended to own something they didn't. And that I wasn't holding them hostage. She was. Whispers turned into open complaints. People said she told them she cleared this with a lawyer. She told them I was breaking the law. She was the reason they couldn't host the kids' regatta now. One of the dads, holding a tiny life jacket, shook his head and said she picked a fight with the guy who literally owns the water over a boat that honestly looked pretty cool. Patricia snarled that they would take this to court. My lawyer, lounging on a folding chair with a soda, smiled and said please do, they loved judges. The vice president took a deep breath. He moved to remove Patricia Denholm as HOA president and as chair of all lake-related committees, effective immediately. And as a condition of negotiating any future lake license, they would issue a written admission that the HOA has no ownership over Silver Pine Lake. Hands shot up. It was a stampede of agreement. Patricia's own supposed allies voted yes. The motion passed by a humiliating landslide. Per the lake owner's current policy, the vice president added, the Yacht and Paddle Sport Club was disbanded. Patricia looked like someone had just repossessed her personality. She sputtered that they couldn't just erase her club. But she was drowned out by the sound of neighbors cheering, some politely, some with petty enthusiasm worthy of an Olympic medal. Patricia stood frozen, her clipboard falling from her hands, as the crowd dispersed around her, leaving her alone on the beach.